What we have here is an Echo ES250 leaf blower and vacuum with the fixins. And this was purchased on Facebook Marketplace for $100 because it apparently will not start or run. And the gentleman that sold it to me told me he replaced the carburetor and the spark plug and it still does not start. So I'm going to try my best to get this up and running, and hopefully I've scored a good deal on an essential piece of yard equipment. We're going to set the throttle lock to full wide open like that. You can see it's fully depressed. The ignition button's all the way forward for start. And there's our primer bulb. It doesn't look like it's... There we go. It was kind of empty. The tank does have fuel that came with it. They make it real easy on this one. They didn't even make you read the choke open, choke close symbol. They got run and cold start. So we're going to have that set. And then, yeah, we're going to pull the cord. And if it pops off, most likely it's, going to just pop for a split second. At that point, then I'll turn off the choke and hopefully it'll fire up at full throttle. Maybe the man was mistaken. Seems promising. Okay. Starts and dies real quick. Maybe it'll run at idle. Maybe the high-speed jet is clogged. Another prime. Well, it's got some signs of life. No, doesn't like that. Alright, so it won't start. It's either fuel or no ignition. So from what I could hear after it died, when I was pulling the cord, it seemed like it was trying to run, as in you could almost hear it trying to, pop off, which tells me the spark, i.e. ignition system's probably okay, but we're gonna hook up an inline spark tester, and also probably a good idea to check the gap just to assess the state of the ignition system, basically. We have the best friend to the Shade Tree Mechanic, which is an inline spark tester. We're going to use this just to validate the performance of the ignition system. Alright, so we're going to test the ignition system with this inline spark tester. Let's see, there we go. Make sure I don't block the view. Whoops. Gotta make sure we're still in focus here. Oops, this is kind of tricky. Oh. Yep, we got spark. Hopefully you can see that. That little, it's faint, but it's there. An additional thing I'm going to check on the ignition, even though we know, we have juice, we have spark, so to speak. So I wanted to check the spark plug gap just to make sure that's correct, so we can just fully establish the ignition system is tip-top, and that ultimately our running symptoms are a function of a problem with the fuel system. So one thing that kind of seemed a little odd was when I went to loosen the spark plug, I didn't even have to put like a ratchet or anything. I literally just barely put any pressure and spun it loose with my hand. So yeah, now the plug itself, if you can get it to focus, I mean, it looks basically new. So I don't know, I'm going to look up the proper gap and then get out the feeler gauges just to make sure that this thing has the proper gap set, and then make sure it's, of course, torqued down properly. Here we got the spark plug gap right there. So we're going to check that as well as, well, make sure it's that NGK plug they call out. The plug in this thing is a Torch. Never heard of that brand, but that's what I looked up on Google. It's a Torch L7T. And when I looked up a spark plug, cross-reference it, it cross-references with NGK BPM 7A. And the manual for this Echo says this thing takes a BPM 8Y. So while I don't believe this is the exact plug, it does seem to be awfully close. So for now, we're just going to gap it like the NGK plug is called out in the manual and just see if it helps us any. You might not be able to see the writing, but this is the proper feeler gauge, 0.65 millimeters, and I believe that's 0.026 inches. Anyway, when I check my gap here, it's a little tight. The gap is not quite wide enough, so I'm going to actually open up that gap a little bit so the feeler gauge slips right between the two with just the slightest amount of resistance. Now we have our gap. There's just the slightest amount of resistance. Tricky to do this in front of a camera, let me tell you. Maybe it could be a little tighter. Okay, we got our gap set. There's definitely some resistance holding it, but I think we're just about right. The age-old question. Nope. As I was moving this around, I hear a little springy clicky noise here. So what does that tell me? Well, there is a switch of some kind. Now, something like this would probably have some sort of safety mechanism that shuts off the ignition. This thing. So what was happening is you'd pull the cord, presumably this would be pushed in, depressing whatever safety switch that's called. It would run, the vibration, or maybe the fan here would essentially push this out, cut off the ignition. That's why it would run for a few seconds and then cut out. So it seems the owner just simply wasn't presumably aware of this. But yeah, so when this is pressed in, it allows the ignition system to run and allow the leaf blower to run. But if it comes out, then it shuts off the ignition. Now it looks like there's a little thumb screw here, so I don't know if I can tighten this down enough, and that'll just keep it from moving. Here's our little safety switch right there. That's what makes the clicky. And what this looks to be designed to do is that if you don't have this cover, which protects your hand from getting ripped off by the impeller, if it's not tightened down firmly enough, it won't depress the safety switch, which of course will shut off the ignition and stop the engine and, you know, make this thing safer if this thing busts off or whatever. And this thumb screw got really hard to turn without it, you know, tightening this down fully. And I can tell the threads are kind of like caked up with dirt and stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and use my thread cleaning brushes and some solvent and clean out that hole so that this thing can be screwed down all the way flush and actually depress that safety switch. All right, I just cleaned the screw threads with just a little bit of carb cleaner and the wire brush on a drill. And now this thing will screw down all the way so that this cover is nice and tight and flush and the safety switch is now depressed. And what we're going to see is this thing runs perfectly. All right, let's give this baby a try. So let's see, we're going to take it off cold start. Turn the ignition on, throttle locked. And let's hear it run. I'll give it a start up here so you can hear what it runs like now that I've ran it for a bit and tuned it. Sounds perfect.